Dorothy was crying. Why tomorrow? Because they know. He said for the third time he pounded his bed. They know. They know. They know. And they're not going to wait. Plus Pigeon Day is coming up. It's only going to get worse. Henry wouldn't hurt Nipper. Henry doesn't count. The others. She implored, but why? Why can't you just hide him in the house or in my house? They'll find out. He spoke wearily, pacing. They were right in his room last night. The cat was here today. They know everything. They won't give up. What we really ought to do is take him out tonight under cover of darkness. She blurted out, no. So he shrugged. Tomorrow? She slumped, facing the wall, her forehead leaning into it. Why don't they just let him alone? She looked at him as if the answer was there to reveal. What did he ever do to them? He looked up to the closet shelf where Nipper was roosting. He was born a pigeon, that's what. How can you do it? She whined. The mouths of spring and summer had filed the nerves to a point. He was nearly galloping back and forth across his room, though he muffled the volume of his voice lest his parents hear. His entire body screamed, how can I do it? How can I do it? Can't you get it through your head? They're going to kill him. Do you want him dead? Earlier in the day, Dorothy had seen unflattened nerf ball in the street and had retrieved it. She stroked it now in her lap. Her voice was barely audible. I just don't want him gone. He went to the window. A quarter moon was out. He began to weep. Do you think I do? The next morning they met at 6 o'clock with bikes. Dorothy's bike had a wicker basket fixed to the handlebars. That is where the shoebox went. Palmer had dumped the toy soldiers onto his bed, poked air holes in the lid, deposited the pigeon. They had told the parents they were going on an early morning breakfast picnic to the park. So in the basket also lay a box of donuts and a mini cartons of iced teas. They rode to the park, out of the park, then out of town. They rode past the barbecue restaurant, the burned-out barn, and the golf course. The drew-eyed topped greens looked like silver ponds. They stopped only to switch bikes when Dorothy could no longer bear to transport the basket. They pedaled down the roads they had seen only before in a car. Then they went down roads they'd never seen at all. The only sounds were the whir of spokes and the crunch of tires. Up and down the hills they rode and rode and rode until it seemed like they must be in another state, if not another country. Palmer, leading the way, pulled off the road by a field where horses were grazing. Let's eat, he said. Dorothy took the donuts and the drinks from the big basket. Is this where we let him go? No, not far enough. Not far enough? He pinched the straw into the iced tea carton and took a long sip. He shook his head. We have to go as far as we can. Pigeons can find their way back from a long way off. Dorothy broke off a piece of donut and stuck it under the lid of the shoebox. It was immediately snatched from her fingers. I can't even find my way back from here. You're not a pigeon. He bit into the donut. Even far's not enough. It has to be confusing, too. She was alarmed. What do you mean? You're not going to blindfold him. He sneered. No, but something else. You'll see. He had taken only one bite of the donut. He slipped the rest into the shoebox. All right, let's go. Another endless stretch of riding brought them to an unfenced meadow. Palmer said, here, and veered into it. Wait, he called back. Dorothy stopped at the roadside and watched Palmer drive her bicycle deeper into the meadow. The wheels jumped, the basket bounced over the clouded earth. Thistle tops erupted, wildflowers wobbled, and the bike charged in the reckless patterns only to fly. Could follow circles, figure eights, zigzags, crazy doodles. This went on for many minutes, and then suddenly the bike bolted onto a beeline near the woods beyond. Dorothy waited as long as she could before she became impatient, then worried. When she could not see an inch into the dense sun was overhead, making the shadows of the desert of a meadow. The handlebars of the bike were hot. Then there was popping from the woods, pedaling furiously straight at her, the donut box flying in the basket. He came closer, and he saw that his face was red and wet, his mouth twisted. The shoebox was empty. He did not stop nor look at her, but charged on with a clatter onto the road. It was a long time before they slowed down, allowing her to catch up. They switched back to their own bikes, and they rode in silence. They asked directions at a gas station. They bought sodas, threw away the donuts. Then they coasted, finally, to the hill into town. The streets were in shadows. Wearily, they climbed the stairs to Palmer's room. Nipper was waiting on the windowsill. He thought of not feeding Nipper, of not letting him in. Sooner or later, pigeons would get the hint and fly away forever, he told Dorothy of his idea, hoping she would forbid it. She did. She yelped so loud that he had to clamp his hand over her mouth. Okay, okay, he said. He began pacing. But we gotta do something. We gotta get rid of him. Dorothy did not argue. They're not gonna give up. No way, not till they get him. Pacing and pacing. They're gonna keep sneaking that cat in. They're gonna spy on this house. Day and night, day and night. They'll wait and wait. Slingshots, BB guns, maybe even poison. Pacing arms upthrust. They put poison in the cereal on the roof. Dorothy was laughing. Palmer stopped. Scowled. What? She was on her back of the bed on her toy soldiers, howling at the ceiling. She dragged herself up and found her voice. Do you do what you were doing? What? Walk. He took a step. No. Walk. She swept her hand back and forth like you were. He resumed pacing, suddenly conscious of his feet. He looked down and saw what she was laughing at. Nipper was pacing and turning and tracing his every move, back and forth across the room. He halted, the pigeon halted. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The next day his mother confessed. It happened after breakfast. He was in her room. He heard the mother's footsteps coming up the stairs. Normally the footsteps would turn and head for the bathroom or her own bedroom. This time they came straight to his door. Knock. Palmer, can I come in? Quickly he glanced around the room. He noted two white powdery droppings that he had neglected to clean up, and a cereal box on the floor. He had been getting lax lately. At least the bird itself left for the day. He kicked the cereal box under the bed and composed his face. Come in. She came in smiling. Hi, she said. She waved as if she couldn't see him in the kitchen 2 minutes ago. Hi, he said. He did not wave. He was standing on one of the powdery poopies. The other one was on his desk, which was exactly where she sat. Her left hand palm down, no more than an inch from the white deposit. He expected her to look around to inspect the place. He had been asked to stay away for a few months, but she kept looking only at him, smiling. And then she saw how it was not quite a regular smile. There was a goofy quality to it, and it was changing, breaking down. I have a confession to make, she said. Her face was now droopy, but wasn't real. It was pretend clownishness. He said nothing. The smile went back, real and regular. We know you have a pigeon. He could not move or speak. She laughed. Palmer, breathe. He breathed. She held out her arms. Come here. He went to her and swallowed entirely in her embrace. All strength drained out from him, and all of a sudden he understood how alone he had been and how much he had missed his parents' support. He sobbed, and she held him tighter, swaying. From beyond the heartbeat, he heard her voice. Didn't you notice things weren't always the way you left them? Didn't you notice that it never got dusty in here? Did you really think you could keep your mother out of your room in her own house? Actually, he had thought so. She held him at arm's length, and he had never seen such a smile. Her eyes were gleaming radiant. Didn't you notice that new box of Honey Crunchers magically appeared in your closet whenever the old box was almost empty? He stared at her, blinking. Yes, he had noticed that, and that's exactly what he had thought. Magic. She laughed aloud, hugged him again, and released him. Didn't you think you could have a pet pigeon in the house since what, January? And Daddy and I wouldn't know about it? I thought you'd be mad, he said. She fluttered her fingers at the door. Go get me a tissue. She fetched a tissue from the room. She used it to wipe the dropping off the desk. And don't forget the one you're standing on, she said, tossing the tissue into the basket. She stared at him. Mad? Why would I be mad at you? He stated, It's a pigeon. She nodded. Her voice became very soft. I understand. We understand. And we were a little concerned, but not mad. Never mad. But he did not know how to put it. Dad? She smiled. Don't worry. Your dad's been changing. He'd even go watch the Pigeon Day last year. Much less shoot. She put her hand on his shoulder. One night, don't tell him. I told you this. One night, he snuck into your room while you were sleeping and stood there with a flashlight at your closet looking at your pigeon. She chuckled. Take my word for it. That bird is safe with your dad as it is with you. They talked through much of the morning. Palmer told her everything about Nipper's arrival and the snowstorm and the day wake up and peck his ear. The guys and their growing suspicions and the tree stumping Dorothy and spitting in the classroom floor. He wished he had a camera to preserve the look on her face, refusing the treatment. When he told her of this, the lifelong fear, he dreaded the day that would come 10 and be a ringer. His lip quivered, and she made a sound of pain and squeezed him tight and stroked his head and his back. After a while, she said, Don't let Nipper go. Keep him. He tried to explain. He tried to make her understand what life was like for him, that there was simply not enough room in the town. Not this town, for himself, the guys, and the pigeon. His fear was too great. He told her that his course hadn't been set. So, when, a day later, Dorothy told him that her family was heading to the seashore for a vacation, Palmer asked her to take Nipper along and release him there. She protested, but in the end, spoke to her parents, and her parents, as Palmer had hoped, they would agree to take care of things. Dorothy came for Nipper the night before. She refused to use the shoebox. She carried him, the sleeping bird, across the street in her hands. The next day, Palmer stayed in bed till noon. Despite the heat, he slept with his window shut and locked and the shade drawn. Still, he could hear them, Beans and Muddo, squalling like alley cats on the back porch of the roof. They could hear them raise the screen, knock on the window, work to open it. On the street, a tree stumped him. They planted themselves in front of him so that he had to step around them, only to find them replanted in his new path. It took him half an hour to walk 1 block. They mocked him, they taunted him, they flicked his ears, they spit on his sneakers. Beans bared his greenish-yellow teeth and breathed baked beans into his face. It was as if he had never been one of them. He's gone, he told them. They laughed. They didn't believe him. He had an idea to invite them all to his room and let them see for themselves. Maybe they would believe it, back off, but then he realized that his mother would never again allow them in the house. It was then it occurred to him that when he thought of the guys, he really was thinking only of one of them, Beans and Muto, not Henry. Henry was one of them, all right, but he was different. Maybe he could sneak Henry into his room, prove it to Henry. The guys agreed. He did not have to convince Beans and Muddo that his mother was dangerous to them, especially in her house. And why it was frustrated them that only Henry would be able to have the privilege, he was too curious not to let that happen. So Beans looked up at Henry. He tugged on Henry's red and white striped t-shirt until Henry bent down to Beans' height. Check it out good. Don't let him trick you. Henry nodded. Report back to me, okay? Palmer chose a morning when his mother was out, while Beans and Muddo waited Sitting brazenly across the street on Dorothy's front steps, he led Henry to his house. Up in the room, he let out both arms and said, "It's all yours. Look all you want." While Henry looked about, poking obediently into the closet, Palmer studied Henry. Henry was so tall that the top of his head grazed the basketball net, and yet sometimes he did not give an impression of bigness. On the contrary, he seemed quite small, smaller than Beans and Mutto, smaller than even Palmer. "Thanks for the warning," Palmer said to him, Henry peering foolishly into the wastepaper basket. "What warning?" "On the cake." Henry paused and said, "Oh, yeah." Palmer watched him search for more. "What's your real name?" Henry looked startled. His eyes went to the window, as if the guys might be lurking there. He never even looked at Palmer. "Huh? I know Bean's real name is Arthur, and Muddle's real name is Billy, but who are you really?" Henry dropped to his knees, ducked under the bed. He stood back up, his wide eyes, careful to avoid Palmer, swept across the walls. "George," he said as he left the room. He hurried down the stairs. Palmer called, "George, quit," he called. "I saw you pulling your little sister in the wagon." But Henry, really George, was already out the door. Whatever Henry told them must have worked. They believed it. They backed off. They came across Palmer in the street. In the park, they just continued to harass him, but they stopped coming to his house. They did not go out of their way to find him, nor did that he cared. He tumbled lifelessly through July, feeling dry and empty as a cicada husk on the trees. Down to the empty alleyways he strode on his bike. He hardly ever saw Dorothy. They avoided each other. When they met accidentally on the street, they said hi quickly and turned the opposite directions. He threw away the shoebox that had served as both soldiers' barracks and Nipper's roost. He kept the soldiers now in a sock drawer. Sometimes he took them out to play. He arranged them on the desk, facing them, the enemy. Sometimes the enemy was a large, formidable, such as a hippo, clipper. Sometimes it was one pink, defenseless eraser. One day, his father showed him the proper placement of the troops and how to space them out so that the landmine would never kill more than one. He sent them flankers to the left and the right, curling a semicircle to hit the enemy from three sides and prevent them all from sneaking behind you. How to keep your platoon in reserve. He learned where to place the green-faced lieutenant and the captain in the high ground, being priceless, to set the machine gunner on a book, a children's dictionary. Usually, it came to no more than this: deployment of troops, 27 soldiers, leaning 27 tiny olive green rifles, aiming poised on the brink of battle. And then one day they attacked. They moved forward, bore down, and the eraser from all three sides, cutting it off the retreat, pinning it down, murderous crossfire. The lieutenant leading the charge, the captain shouting commands, calling in airstrikes, yet somehow wicked eraser managed to stay alive, managed to even crawl through the front lines, only to be greeted with a backup platoon. Amazingly, it survived this as well as it was up to and running through the half home itself home free. When the machine guns opened up on top of the dictionary, rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, the merciless fusillade of machine guns laid down, and the troops regrouped and joined, and the fire roar of war did not cease until the eraser was dead and cut to ribbons. The next day, he buried the soldiers in the backyard. The tiny green faces had nothing. They had tiny green eyes stared up at him. Dirt fell on him. He continued to read Beetle Bailey and cut out the strips. He no longer mounted them on the collections. He just stopped cutting them out. He stopped reading. He never touched his Nerf ball. Then that hung unswished. He still kept his door closed, but sometimes he kept it open too. He went to his father, to the Titans baseball game, to the Twilight Sampiro League. They drove to Denville. It was good to get another town, but not very good. He ate a hot dog with a relish and a soft pretzel and mustard and a birch beer. The birch beer was red. The uniforms of the Titans were orange. The shirts were orange. The socks, the t-shirt cap All black and orange stripes went from the belt all the way top to the stirrup sock. The catcher's chest protector was orange, and so were the shortstop's shoelaces. In the fourth inning, there was a home run and another greater one. The ball flew high above the cheering crowd into the twilight sky over the billboard fence. It landed in dirt beyond the center field leap and rolled onto the parking lot, a white pureness against the black macadam. Suddenly, kids were racing, a flock of boys bending themselves around the parked cars, colliding at the rolling ball. When they separated, one had his hand raised. The last inning, there was a foul ball, though at first Palmer did not know it. He was reading the billboards, and suddenly people around him were leaping out of their seats. Someone was shooting him a look. Look out! A shadow fell over him. Turning, he heard the sound, inches from his face. Someone, like a slip from laughter, his father's voice said, Gotcha! His father's body standing, leaning over him, blotting out the entire field, the sky. Then the light came back, and someone was saying, Look at his face! His father was smiling and looking down, and his hands were opening like a flower. On the ride home, Palmer held his foul ball in his own hands and imagined he felt a heartbeat.